Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Graditam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamra Varshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us again. Last week, Krishna introduced certain factors involved in knowledge-based transactions and action-based transactions. This language is kind of the favorite of Bhagavad Gita commentaries. But transaction just means different actions that we do. Sometimes we have to use our mind and our sensory faculties to understand something. And then there are other kinds of actions which are, walking, talking, speaking. These are a different category. So you have knowledge base, which is receiving sensory input, and the action is using your it's the indriyas of movement and speaking, things like that. So we have two different categories. So then Lord Krishna divided those into sattva, rajas, and tamas, starting with knowledge. So in this chapter, knowledge means sensory information that reaches the intellect through the mind. It's not the knowledge of God realization or self-realization. So far we have heard of the first two types of knowledge, with sattvic knowledge being defined in verse 20 as that knowledge by which the one imperishable existence, the Atma, is perceived, seen, in all beings, undivided in separate beings. In other words, you can see that these beings are different, but they're not divided. It's just on the surface. In other words, seeing oneness everywhere in Maya's seeming diversity is sattvic knowledge. Rajasic knowledge was defined as knowledge that in all beings sees very entities of distinct kinds as different from one another. From our standpoint, we feel that there are an infinite number of souls or jivatmas, including insects. Amma tells us to see life in everything, even an ant. She says if you think you love Amma, then you have to love the little tiny ant as well. So did you know, this is just to give you an idea of how many beings, living beings there are on this planet. Did you know that insects probably have the largest biomass of any terrestrial animals, with about 10 quintillion individual insects alive at any given time? That means there are about 1.25 billion insects for each person. Now, by the way, I would be happy to donate mine to anyone who wants them. But it also means that Rajasic knowledge believes that there are 10 quintillion atmas, just insects alone. So if there are 10 quintillion insects, each one has a separate atma. This is the way that Rajasic knowledge is. But we cannot blame them, because this is basically our experience. We see others as different from us. Our Jivatma is associated to this body, and their Jivatma is associated with their body, creating the superficial appearance of many Jivatmas. We not only see many Jivatmas, each one of them also seems to be different from the others. So scientists believe that there are at least 8.7 million life forms on Earth, which we also perceive to be totally different. On top of that, there are innumerable subtle beings like Devas, Asuras, Yakshas, Gandharvas, Apsaras. In India's all these scriptures and the fables and everything that they have is there are so many subtle beings that come into the stories and play a part. So we cannot see them, but we know they exist. To us, all of the above feel like different Jivatmas who come and die individually with their own karma. But what does Vedanta say? What does Krishna say? What does Amma say? Even though the Jivatmas appear as many, they are all nothing but the one Paramatma. As Krishna said in the 3rd verse of this chapter, of chapter 13, know me as the kshatrajna, which means consciousness, in all kshetras, which means bodies. So he is the consciousness in all bodies, and our mind and intellect also. If we had that vision of oneness, seeing all these beings as none other than the Paramatman, that is called sattvic knowledge. It's not the easiest kind of knowledge to acquire. Looking at the Jivatmas as being different is Rajasic knowledge. Within human society, such a person also differentiates people according to their role in society, their wealth, their education. In essence, Sattva sees only oneness, while Rajas sees nothing but division. And when I concluded the class last week, I said, dare we find out about what tamasic actions are? Well, tamasic knowledge is, then we will continue. Some people said, no, I don't want to hear about it. But we have to go and enter that topic as well in verse 22. Yattu kritsna vade kasmin karye saktam ahetukam atatvarta vadalpanja tattamasam udahratam. Now together. Yattu kritsna vade kasmin karye saktam ahetukam attatvarta vad alpancha tattamasamudharatam. I only changed a little bit. But that knowledge in parentheses, but that knowledge which is confined to one single effect, as if it were the whole without reason, without foundation in truth and trivial, that is declared to be tamasic. Now the commentaries, I didn't take much of Shankaracharya's commentary because it'll become clear through the other commentaries in a little more, modern way, makes it easier to understand. So he says, which is confined to one single effect. The definition or the meaning of that is, Shankaracharya says, it is like the body or an internal object such as an image. So confining it to a body or confining it to an image, a single image. These are the kind of points he's looking for. And as if it were the whole means thinking that this much is the self, or this is God, and there is nothing beyond that. So you can begin to visualize what kind of a person, what kind of a religion, what kind of a belief system would come from these kind of people. Then Shankaracharya gives examples of contemporary faiths of his time that believe the soul resides in the body, or that God is the actual sculpture in the temple. And one more quote from Shankaracharya. In that manner, such knowledge sticks to one single effect, not based on proof, and because it is not founded on reason, it becomes trivial, as producing petty results. This kind of knowledge is found in tamasic beings who lack in discernment. We're going to hear a lot from Jnaneshwar today. He has some really good, every time, but I have to say it over and over again. So grateful. The knowledge that wanders about naked, stripped of all scriptural mandates and thus rejected by the Vedas and other reputed scriptures, a heinous creed mislabeled as religion. Doesn't sound like he likes it very much. And you should all know that when I quote the Jnaneshwari, I have to do a lot of polishing of the language because it's quite verbose and it's not so easy to understand in our times. So, and I'm also removing some of the things in between that don't make sense for people here. This knowledge, possessed by the demon of tamas, roams about like a lunatic. That knowledge observes no restrictions regarding bodily contact and doesn't prohibit anything, like a stray dog in a desolate village devours everything. Wow, it's just so vivid. Just like a dog just eats out of the garbage can, they're doing whatever they want. A rat stealing gold ornaments doesn't care how pure it is. A non-vegetarian doesn't care what color the animal was, so long as they get their meat. A forest fire doesn't discriminate while burning the forest trees. A fly sitting on a body does not care to see if it is dead or alive. A crow does not mind if his food is coming from vomit or well-prepared food, fresh or completely rotten. In that way, the conclusion is what you have to listen to. In that way, tamasic knowledge has no discretion to abandon what is prohibited and accept only what is permitted by the wise. They don't care about those rules and injunctions. Whatever they see, they take it as intended for enjoyment, and if it happens to be a woman and riches, he allocates them to the male generative organ and the stomach, respectively. Nasty thing in very nice language. He does not know how to discern between holy and unholy waters. He only cares about quenching his thirst and feeling happy. Similar is the case in regard to comestibles and non-comestibles. That means food, right? Whether forbidden or unforbidden. His only criterion is this: whatever is agreeable to the tongue is holy and pure. I gotta hand it to them. They're very simple to understand. Regarding women, the only relation through which he can understand them is the sense of touch. He entertains only one idea about them: sexual enjoyment. To one who considers the entire universe as merely an object of enjoyment, its only end and purpose is feeding his physical needs. That's how he sees the universe. As the sea is the final destination of rainwater, all the endeavors of tamasic knowledge culminate in feeding his belly. Tamasic knowledge is ignorant about places like heaven and hell, or which is better. They don't even know which one is better. Tamasic knowledge does not extend beyond the belief that the body is the Atman. They think the Atman is really just the body, or the stone idol is God. According to that knowledge, the soul also dies when the body falls, so there's no one to experience the karmic effects of past actions. You can do what you want scot-free. There's no karma. Further, if the existence of God is presumed, this part is really, you can't think of these things on your own. Further, if the existence of God is presumed, and if it is accepted that he dispenses pleasure and pain to the people according to their acts, then that God is fit to be auctioned off and the proceeds used for their livelihood. No, who would think of such a thing? Tamasic knowledge asks, if the stone idols of God in the village temple are taken as ruling the universe, wouldn't the mountains who provided this stone have a far superior claim to rule the universe compared to the stone idols? If you read Awakened Children, there are youngsters who come to Amma and ask questions similar to that. Tamasic knowledge regards good and bad karma as pure lies. According to experience, only what can be physically perceived, like the ears and tongues and eyes, only that is real. In some, the term knowledge is merely a misnomer. Tamasic knowledge is not real knowledge at all. It is only visual darkness. Interesting way of putting it. You can see something, but it's only dark. So, hearing this commentary, it sounds like a faith of indulgence, a topic on which Amma has given her own commentary, which I'll share with you now. In the West, I know people talk about Tantra, the path of Tantra, sadhana, and Amma has always sort of warned people about that path. And here's an example. A brahmachari once asked Amma about the path of Tantra. If you don't know what Tantra is, just look it up. I'm not going to explain. Naturally, that elicited a very serious response from Amma. She said, Amma would say that Tantric sadhana is one of the most misunderstood paths. In the name of Tantric sadhana, people start drinking, engaging in sex and other licentious and irresponsible behavior. They say that they are offering it to the Divine Mother, but it's the Divine Mother herself saying that she doesn't want it. Okay, but that's not what Amma said. They say that they are offering it to the Divine Mother, but ultimately such people get totally carried away by such indulgence. Their ignorance about real sadhana becomes denser and denser, and they argue that whatever they do is correct. A beginner cannot simply declare everything is divine, including the body, and therefore I'm going to enjoy and indulge. He's not going to reach the goal that way. A certain amount of self-control is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, what is the difference between a seeker and a person who constantly indulges in sensual pleasures? Realization will not come just like that. Devotional singing is the devotee's form of indulgence. What a beautiful way of putting it. Worldly people find their pleasure in external things, but internal delight is harmless. Once you have experienced it, you will no longer go in search of external indulgence. If you get delicious food at home, will you go looking for it somewhere else? In prayer, we look within for a place of rest. This is not like a candle that has to be lit with external help. It is a light that shines spontaneously. It is a path on which we discover the light shining within ourselves. In the material world, people seek satisfaction through desire, but it is prayer that leads to peace of mind. You may experience some peace from the material world, but it is never permanent. So, Amma's commentary. Then Chidbhavananda Swami, his commentary, he died about 30-40 years ago, but very good commentary. There are people who believe that their individuality is confined to the physical frame made up of the 5 elements. That means the body. The perishing matter, the body, is mistaken for the persisting principle. So the infinite is being mistaken for the finite. The immortal is being confused with the mortal. An image is merely an aid for the worship of God, just as a map is an aid for geography. But the ignorant man thinks that the image made of a metal or of wood to be God. This attitude is evidence to the fact that he clings to one single effect as if it were the whole. He finds it incomprehensible that he is more than just the body, and that God is beyond form. Such an ignorant person also cannot understand that God is indestructible, all-powerful, and all-merciful. Even still, he imagines himself a self-appointed champion of God and a defender of faith. In the name of serving God and religion, he wreaks havoc on society and prevents its harmonious growth. You can just visualize the kind of people they're talking about. We don't have to, talk about it here, but I'm sure you're visualizing in your mind right now. The so-called proselytizers play the part of the blind leading the blind. These are all specimens of tamasic knowledge. They are not only out of tune with reason, they even go against reason. They are so because they are not founded in truth. Whims and fancies as they are, they have to be treated as trivial. Nothing good comes out of such baseless understanding. So, Krishna says tamasic knowledge leads a person to be totally attached to one physical form. In rajasic knowledge, at least, we could appreciate the many forms in creation. But no, they only think one thing matters. Sattvic knowledge is Advaita Vedanta, which is Amma's teaching, showing us how to see God as formless and all-pervading. Rajasic knowledge leads us to see many forms of God, like Rama, Krishna, Devi, but we might think each one is different and separate from the others. If that's the case, the problem is that we can develop ideas of superiority and inferiority. Like people put 5,000, murtis on in their puja room, and they think that if I don't put Shiva, he'll get angry at Vishnu, and then Ganapati has to be there. So they have to have everybody because they think they're separate. So once we focus only on one form, we think it is the ultimate, disparaging other forms. That is tamasic knowledge, which gives birth to fundamentalism and other things. Only one God or only one form are recognized, and others are belittled, sometimes even resorting to violence and killing. We have seen these things in history many times. We don't have to repeat those kind of things. Another problem with tamasic knowledge is that we are completely ignorant of everything but our own body. Our whole life is about my body. Like we say only one God, we say only one body, mine. That's what matters. So this is getting close to the ancient philosophy of Charvaka, the Charvakas. It was around at least 2,600 years ago. And they only accept that the Atma has to be the body. What Amma says is all-pervasive and it's eternal. They say, no, it's just the body. So that means that every time a body is born, a new Atma is born. And every time a body dies, the Atma is also gone. That one Atma, we have to count. Quadrillions, remember? Septillions. As a result, they reject the law of karma because each Atma has only one life and there's no afterlife, so there's no karma. From the logical standpoint, for each action there must be an equal and opposite reaction. But the Charvakas have no explanation of why different people are born in different forms and circumstances. It may seem to be a strange faith, but sadly this is the belief of a good portion of humanity even today. Most people, even some scientists, think that this world has come into existence for no other reason than the laws of physics. Forget about who created the laws of physics. If the world has no higher purpose than physics, how can human life have a higher purpose? Life is considered to be the product of happenstance, so the Charvakas encouraged people to have as much pleasure as possible, even if you have to steal from others. So, I'm sorry to say that this is actually a perfect philosophy for Kali Yuga, and I don't think it's going to go away unless that's what she's here for, but she herself says, Kali Yuga is Kali Yuga, don't expect it to change. All we can do is create a golden age around ourselves. So seeing God only in one form is not much better. Just like we said in the case of Rajasic knowledge, it means that you see all these beings, but they are not the same. So this happens in history as well. It's probably more prevalent these days. So why is it trivial, though? That word that he used as trivial, what does that mean? Because the knowledge gives very limited benefit. Whether it is a belief in only one God or in one body, the benefit of having guiltless freedom to do whatever they want, however they want, is short-lived. We can enjoy for some time, but later misery and suffering will come once our health and our wealth is depleted. Whether we are Charvaka followers or followers of materialism, it is all tamasic knowledge. And with this, the topic of the three types of knowledge is over. Sattvic knowledge is undivided, seeing the same Atma everywhere. Rajasic knowledge agrees that the Atma is different from the body, but is not the same Atma everywhere. Each body has a different Atma. Tamasic knowledge claims that the Atma is the body. Other than Vedanta, all the ancient schools of thought in India were dualistic. So Nyaya, you might have heard of Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Purvamimamsa, Vishishta, Advaita, all of them fall in the category of Rajasic knowledge because they're dualistic. They still believe in the Vedas but interpret the meaning differently, even though the Upanishads disprove their beliefs. Next, the threefold nature of action is stated. Let us move on to verse 23. Niyatam Sangarahitam Araga Tveshata Apalaprepsuna Karma Yattat Sattvikamucchate. Now together. Niyatam Sangarahitam Aragadveshata Kritam Aphala Prepsuna Karma Yattat Sattvikam Uchate. I didn't change anything except for added one comma, two commas, three, sorry, to make it easier. An ordained action, comma, done without love or hatred, comma, by one not desirous of the fruit, comma, and free from attachment, is declared to be sattvic. You can understand it without the commas, but it makes it a little easier to follow the train of thought. An ordained action done with love or hatred by one not desirous of the fruit and free from attachment is declared to be sattvic. Okay. So, doing it without love or hatred means the action is not done by a person who is prompted by attachment or hatred. They're just neutral to it. They're doing it for another reason, which we're going to hear about in a moment. Jnaneshwar says, such an action becomes an ornament to the fitness of the doer. Doer, remember that is it's the jivatma, it's the sense that I'm doing this, and that jivatma, or we can call it the doer to simplify it, that is the reflection of consciousness in the subtle body, which is Chidabhasa, and that is the entity that tells the hands what to do and tells the mouth what to do and cognates and tries to figure out things and feels what is right and wrong, those kind of things, all the jivatma. So here, to simplify it, and we're talking about actions, we use the word doer, because it's in Sanskrit, it's karta. Such an action becomes an ornament to the fitness of the doer in the way sandal paste is to a dark complexioned person, or eyeliner to the eyes of a young lady. It makes it look more beautiful. Day-to-day actions are in themselves good. Coupling them with the occasional rituals amounts to adding fragrance to gold. Amma talks about this. He says meditation is like gold, but if it had a fragrance, it would be even more beautiful. And with meditation, we have to add selfless service. So he's saying something similar, just in different words. A mother protects her child even at the cost of her own body and life, yet her mind never tires of it. In that way, he performs actions with heart and soul, without an eye to the fruit, and dedicates them altogether to the Supreme Brahman. He also performs good actions with an even mind, feeling no bitterness in case the actions remain incomplete, or are not done at all, and not getting elated at the successful completion either. Actions performed with such methods are from their own guna property, which is sattva. And for those of you who are not familiar with these words, guna means property or attribute, and sattva is purity basically, rajas is activity, or we could say hyperactivity, and tamas is darkness, lethargy, etc. The commentary of Swami Chidbhavananda Ji, he says, breathing is indispensable to life, and it is done without love or hatred. An ordained duty also should be performed in the same way. The obligatory duty of a person varies with their attainments. Students solve arithmetic problems according to the grade they are in. Similarly, the duties of people vary according to their station in life, like the brahmanas, the people who do the pujas, and then there's civil servants and warriors, and then there's, traders and all kinds of people. So depending on that, their duties are different. The duties of Arjuna's station were to wage war, protecting the innocent and conquering the guilty. Every individual in society has their duty to discharge. It has to be executed faithfully and as incessantly as breathing. No selfish consideration should dominate that work. Duty for duty's sake. That is the motto of the yogi. When the duty is discharged with a sterling attitude, the person grows both in knowledge and efficiency. Action of this caliber is upheld as sattvic. That makes it all clear. And if you read the very first section of the very first awakened children, you will find many conversations regarding some of the most important questions in spirituality. though Amma was only 20 years old at that time, her responses were not only succinct, but also perfectly in line with what the scriptures say. Now we all know that Amma says she has never read the scriptures. She has sometimes said, "You guys have to teach me what the scriptures say." It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Because we know that this is not because she doesn't know, it's because she need not read the scriptures. She is the scripture incarnate. It's like asking the water to study marine biology or something like that. It's a stupid question. For example, a devotee asks, "The scriptures say that God alone is truth. So whatever I see is not truth. How then should one live in this world?" It's a good question. We all should have asked that at one point. And her response as a 22-year-old young woman: "Live a detached life. Don't attach yourself to work or to its fruit. Perform it as an offering. Then your actions will become beautiful and beneficial to others." A 15-second answer that encapsulates the essence of Karma Yoga, and crisper than Lord Krishna's words, which people need in today's world. Those points that he said, all are there, right? Be detached. Don't attach yourself to the work. Don't attach yourself to the fruit. Do it as an offering. Done. And then she says, you get this is the fruit of that. That's why you have to make the effort. Now, Krishna has moved on to the three types of action: sattva, rajas, and tamas. This sattvic action verse is very clear. It's simply karma yoga, which is explained simply in this verse, just like Amma explained it. So now we have 4 names for the same thing: karma yoga, bhakti yoga, sattvic sannyasa, and now sattvic actions. So what does this entail? Doing our duty. In the 7th verse of this chapter, Krishna said, "The abandonment of obligatory action is not proper. Such renunciation due to delusion is declared to be tamasic." Better not do that. And in verse 8 of chapter 3, he says, "Do your allotted duty. Action is indeed superior to inaction." Naturally, the question comes, what duties do I have? A lot of people are confused about that. How do I know what my duty is? Well, that's because in modern times, there's nobody there to teach us this, unless we go into an ashram or some kind of monastery and we learn what the tradition was. Then it becomes very clear. But in a modern way, we can say that there are duties that arise naturally just because you're a human being. And those would be duties like taking care of your parents and giving back to society instead of only taking. This is like common sense for human beings, but these days common sense is not so common. Then there are duties that arise from your own decisions. Like if you decide to have a child, well, you have to take care of the child. If you take a job, you have to do a good job. These are our choices that we have to honor just because it was our decision. Next, there are duties related to your age group and your role in society. That was touched on by Bhagavad Swami, but I'll put it in a little simpler language for our age. So your age group, let's say up to age 20, which was the traditional idea, studying is the duty, the only duty, in fact. We go out and get part-time jobs to pay for school, but in the ancient times, school was free, and up to age 20, the guru in the Gurukula would teach everybody everything they needed to know. So all they had to do, they didn't even have to, they'll do some seva, help the food, making the food, but their main job was studying. That's all they had to think about. And then, if you're a civil servant, well, then working for the greater good is your duty, and whatever you're supposed to do in your position in society, and and running an honest business is the duty for traders, and so on. But after a certain age, you don't have any of those responsibilities anymore, because that's the age factor. So you're no longer studying, you're no longer a householder. Either you're, semi-retired or completely retired. And in the very end, like 10, 20 years, we're supposed to be living like a sannyasi. So your duties vary due to your stage in society and your age. And on top of all these, the most important duties are dropping attachment to our actions as well as to their fruit. That fruit can be either visible or invisible. Like praise and acknowledgement is visible, and the invisible benefit would be good karma or, going to heaven or something like that. So we don't even think about those things. That's why I say we don't want to go to heaven, because then you're no longer in the sattva category. You have some self-interest there, so that spoils everything. Earlier, Krishna rolled up all these duties as yajna, dana, and tapa. Yajna means an offering, karma, and dana is, so yajna is giving back on the macro level to society, and then dana is you're giving back, but more to the local community. So you give something to the ashram, you give it to Hesed House, you don't have to give money to Hesed House, you can help cook the meal on Sunday, the first Sunday of every month. And tapas is controlling our mind regularly. And in verse 10 of this chapter, Krishna said, "The relinquisher endowed with sattva and a steadfast understanding, his doubts cut away, does not avoid even an unpleasant action, nor is he attached to a pleasant one." So, what the mind says is unpleasant or pleasant, he doesn't listen to that. That is sattva. Doesn't mean you're God realized necessarily. Another important point about duties is that we cannot divide them and label them as pleasant and unpleasant. Above, it was an unpleasant action or a pleasant one, but now we're talking about duties. If it's a duty, that pleasant and unpleasant feeling is only on the surface. We should really enjoy all duties, without complaining, without grumbling, without whining to others. If it must be done, we should do it pleasantly, without procrastinating. In fact, we should be happy to do it, because if we have the right attitude, all our efforts are an offering to Amma. Actions that meet these conditions are called sattvic action. And let us remember the parallel verse from chapter 2, verse 48. Established in yoga, O Dhananjaya, perform actions having abandoned attachment and balanced in success and failure. For balance of mind is called yoga. Very famous verse. It's something that if I were to get a tattoo, which I never will, but if I was going to get one, I'd want that one on my hand. Now, verse 24. Yattu kamepsunna karma sahankarena va punaha kriyate bahulayasam tadrajasam udahratam. Now together. Yattu Nastu kamepsuna karma sahankarena va punaha kriyate bahulayasam tadrajasam udahritam. But the action which is done desiring enjoyment, or with self-centeredness, or with much strain, is declared to be rajasic. Shankaracharya says that this desiring enjoyment means the fruits of the actions. And the self-centeredness part, he says, the contrast is not between a realized being and an unenlightened person who is egotistic. Instead, it is between a person of the world and one who is learned in the Vedas and free from self-centeredness. So we're not talking about somebody who like Amma or like a God-realized person, but somebody who is, we're comparing a selfish person with someone who is not selfish, which was the previous verse. Now, Jnaneshwar starts by revealing the selfishness of rajasic action. So it's like the prelude to his main point. A fool, never caring to talk a single sweet word to his parents at home, behaves quite courteously in the outside world. One who never gives a single drop of water to a tulasi plant pours milk at the root of a vine plant. Like that, rajasic people never think of getting up to do their duties and rituals, but when the possibility of securing some selfish end arises, he does not consider the exertion to be too much, even if his entire body gets tired. One should not say enough while sowing seeds in order to secure a bumper crop. One should not feel tired while investing money in business where there are prospects of making large profits. One having the power of alchemy, that's the only way I could put it, spends his entire fortune on purchasing iron and becomes very prosperous. In all these ways, a rajasic person engages himself in result-motivated actions, which are intricate and difficult, yet never feels it enough, keeping his sights on the fruit to be secured. He's always it's like the perpetual carrot before the donkey. And he's just going, I'm chasing after it. The difference is that he gets things in between. He doesn't just get close to the carrot. It's like he eats the carrot and they put another carrot in the front. With the temptation of securing the fruit, he performs whatever result-motivated actions he can, neatly and in the enjoined manner, and he goes on blowing his trumpet about what he does and goes on parading his name as an orthodox and pious man. Puffed up with this conceit, he shows no regard either to his father or to his guru. Can you imagine? It's hard for us to imagine. Everybody says it's all almost grace. That's the first thing they say. Actions are performed with great liking by people full of vanity and under the temptation of fruit and with great physical exertion. Like a rat will excavate a mountain for securing only a single grain of corn, or a snake charmer will carry lots of reptiles from house to house, getting nothing more than paltry alms in return. What a pity some people find pleasure in such efforts. We haven't had any snake charmers coming to the ashram these days. Maybe that was from 750 years ago when he was alive. And then Chidbhavananda's commentary. Desire is of two kinds. What promotes our ethical progress, which is what gives service to beings. It's a desire of this kind that is wholesome and fit to be nurtured. But the desire that entangles a person more in worldliness ought to be carefully avoided. Earning money by honest means and expending it on good causes is a material yajna. You're giving back in a material way, which ought to be performed. Money should not be earned by unfair means, even though it may be for a good cause. foul habits deprive people of their humanity. It's so true. We see these, if you see the news, so many horrendous things are taking place. So it means that people have created foul habits in their life, and then they're even worse than the beasts. The very fact that we own a body is a mark of egoism. In addition to that, if the body is used for indulgence, if it is decorated and overly fattened, these undesirable acts lead to worse forms of egoism. The boon of the human body should not be used for such base purposes. Most people think that it's only for that at all. So a pompous body-centered life is the sign of egoism born of rajas. This base nature may be overcome by holding the body as the temple of God. He gave a solution. If people have any faith at all, just say, consider your body to be God's temple. And if you take that sincerely, a lot of our bad qualities will go away. Amma says, the mind is the ego which makes you very self-centered. But instead of being self-centered, you should become centered in the self, the Atman, the real center of your existence. For this to happen, the mind should be extinguished. The ego should die. Only then can you become established in the state of Sakshi Bhava, witness consciousness. So basically what she's saying is that the mind at this point in time is our worst enemy. And if you're living in a house where your arch enemy is, you'll be very careful all the time. That's why she says during the meditation, manase, don't waste your money on buying poison. And your mind is going here and there, and it's just a waste of all your energy and your whole life. So we have to constantly talk to the mind in the same way Amma says. Only then will we get the cooperation. And we somehow have to turn this mind that's can be our enemy right now, we can turn it into our ally. That is another topic that came up in the Bhagavad Gita. You can look in that in the previous chapters. So what are rajasic actions anyhow? The typical actions we see these days. Self-centered actions, pleasure-seeking actions, and strenuous actions. Selfless actions do also have a desire, but only one. May my inner purity grow more and more. That is the sign of a selfless action. Rajasic actions pursue worldly desires only. Amma has taught us to consider any achievement to be God's grace or her grace. By giving thanks for God's grace, our humility will increase even when we so-called accomplish something. On the other hand, the person doing rajasic actions has a very strong ego, and therefore will say, I did it, I was the one that accomplished it. They frequently like to use words like I, me, and mine, so that's a kind of a tip-off. I mean, that's not in just day-to-day conversations, like when you're talking about an accomplishment. And because he has an inordinate number of desires, his activity never stops, which results in a lot of strain. In the case of a sattvic person, however, he does actions as necessary, never overdoing activity. He leaves time for sadhana like yoga, meditation, bhajan, scriptural study, and so on. A balance of action and sadhana is needed for everyone. And that's why Krishna said in chapter 6, verse 17, for one who is moderate in food and recreation, moderate of effort in actions, moderate in sleep and waking, yoga destroys all sorrow. So action should be limited to some degree, but not completely abandoned. Whereas a rajasic person is involved in too many efforts, being extrovert in nature. So what Amma would tell us is that you can do as much seva as you want, so long as you're not extrovert, so long as you are thinking of God and chanting your mantra. Even still, the daily program should be a must for us if we can make it that, or at least part of it. Everybody should participate. It's a tremendous blessing given by the greatest avatar in history. And we'll now move on to verse 25. Anubandham kshayam himsam anapeksha cha paurusham mohad arabhyate karma yattad tamasamuchyate. Now together. Anubandham kshayam himsam anapeksha cha paurusham mohad arabhyate karma yattat tamasam uchyate. That action is declared to be tamasic, which is undertaken through delusion, without considering the consequence, loss of power and wealth, and injury to others and oneself. The one thing that I changed was delusion instead of sheer arrogance. It felt a little bit closer to what I was getting from the verse and the commentaries. And I added a comma after wealth. So, through delusion, according to Shankaracharya, that means lack of judgment. Lack of judgment and loss of energy. Loss means the loss of energy and wealth involved in the performance of that act. Injury means to living beings, and ability means one's own capacity for exertion needed to bring the act to completion. So he's heedless of all these things. He doesn't care about judgment and the energy and wealth isn't involved in the harm that it causes other people. Jnaneshwar says, now the action that gives birth to all that is prohibited and sinful, that is tamasic action. Doesn't sound like something that we would want to do. Such actions are all unfruitful, like churning rice gruel or kanyi. If you've been to Puri, it's a rice gruel. They just put like cooked rice in the rice water that's left after you boil it. And so once you have that, there's no need to churn it or to stir it. It's already stirred. And he says it's unfruitful like blowing on ashes because there's no fire there. It's unfruitful like grinding sand in a mill when it's already ground. Or winnowing the chaff, there's no seeds in the chaff. Or like placing snares to catch the wind. All are futile. Now, such an action performed at the cost of a valuable treasure like the human body spoils the world's happiness, like dragging a thorny bush over lotus flowers, with the result that both the thorns and the lotus flowers get destroyed. A moth flies into a lamp's flame. A moth flying into a lamp's flame not only burns itself, it also extinguishes the lamp flame, because it was an actual naked flame. And leaving people in darkness. So the moth hurts itself or dies, and at the same time, the people that were sitting and using that light, they're now in the darkness. In that way, tamasic actions result in the loss of all wealth and effort and proves injurious to the doer as well to others. Such actions are performed by one devoid of forethought. They don't consider whether they have the ability to execute them and give no thought about the repercussions on others. Tamasic doers also discard other considerations, such as their own resources, the magnitude of the actions, and their own capacity to carry them through. Actions in which virtuous and nefarious elements are hopelessly confused, and in whose performance no regard is paid to the ensuing evil affecting the doer and others, know such actions to be undeniably tamasic. I like this thing where he says, actions in which virtuous and nefarious elements are hopelessly confused. You see that in society. People are like, some people are trying to do good things, and other people are like, have some selfish interests, and it gets all mixed up, and that whole idea, that whole action becomes poisoned, you know. So it's sad, but he really hit the nail on the head. And Chidbhavananda Swami's commentary. The one immersed in tamas is not able to discern whether their undertaking is good or bad, much less the consequence of it. Loss of energy, property, money, and time, he does not regret. His endeavors are harmful both to him and to others. It is not within his grasp to realize his resources are inadequate to complete the project he launches. The doings of such a person are born of tamas. It is only after the practice of intense tapas. Oh, this is a quote of Sri Ramakrishna Deva. It is only after the practice of intense tapas that people are freed of cunningness and miserliness. God vision comes to them who are free from crookedness and deceitfulness. At the same time, in the name of simplicity, one need not become a simpleton. It is good to be a devotee, but bad to be a dullard. Know what is right and do what is good. That's the hardest thing, knowing what is right and doing what is good. So, we now know that selfless actions are sattvic and self-centered actions are rajasic. Now we found out that harmful actions are tamasic. So we have selfless, selfish, and harmful actions. First, tamasic actions originate from delusion, poor judgment, or we could say without proper discernment. It is tamas, simply. Tamaguna, that quality of tama that leads to delusion. It's darkness, it's lethargy, it is so many other, it's improper intellect, and so on. That leads to delusion. Since tamas brings inertia and a lack of awareness, or ashraddha, tamasic actions are the product of ashraddha and a lack of thought. The hallmarks of tamasic action should be regarded as a list of things not to do when starting any undertaking. And I think we have about 5 points, if I'm not mistaken. Overlooking the consequences. So sometimes when we run into some difficulty, we immediately react to get out of the situation. And if they have a problem at work, people come to Amma and say, Amma, can I quit my job? That's the first thing they say, can I quit my job? And they think Amma's going to say yes or no. Then Amma usually tells them to wait until they have another job offer. If we follow our first impulse, we may get into an even worse situation. Economically, and our self-confidence and mental stagnation, all these things can take place. Amma, however, is always clear and thinking of our future more than we are. And she doesn't pay as much attention to our emotional reaction than she than to our future. I remember, it's a story I've told before, but one day I was during Devi Bhava in San Ramon a long time ago, and I was happy to see a Buddhist monk, a Westerner who was a Buddhist monk in the darshan line. I thought, this is wonderful. I'd like to see more like monks come to see Amma. And he got his darshan, and Amma was so happy to see him. She said, come, you can sit next to her for some time. So we got to talking, and then he says, I have a question I have to ask Amma. And I said, okay. And he said, what is it? And then he said, can I remove these robes now? He didn't mean like strip. I mean, just like, can I remove them? And I was so surprised, but I had to ask Amma. I said, Amma, he says he wants your permission to remove his monk robes. Her eyes were like, what? It's like, can I drop a nuclear bomb on New York City? That's what it looked like. It was like, why in the world would you want to do that? And he says, because, actually the first thing he said was, can I become your disciple? Sorry, I forgot that. Can I be your disciple? She said, yes, you can be you're my disciple. That was easy. Then he said, okay, now that I'm your once I'm your disciple, can I take off the robes? She says, no. Basically, her response was no. And then he didn't like that response. And he sat there for a long time, and he meditated. And then he said to me, please tell her that anyhow, I've already decided that I'm going to remove these robes. He left, and I never saw him again. So, Amma's thinking of our future, but perhaps he was experiencing some problems or some difficulties, which Amma could definitely have helped him get out of, but he didn't have the patience, so it's really sad. There are also such situations in the home environment, relatives, so many other scenarios. There will always be incompatibilities, and if our mind is in a tamasic state at that time, we may say or do something we regret, something harmful to others or maybe even to ourselves. So like Amma said the other day, there's something about, I don't remember when she said, it was in between the talk or in between bhajans. She says, when couples fight, the husband might get upset and threaten to leave for the Himalayas. I'm going to the Himalayas. That's their ultimatum. And it's supposed to scare them into, to agree with him. It seems this is rather common in India, but I wonder what would happen if the wife calls his bluff. Go ahead. And it can be mutually harmful for both of them. And there are other things that people do that are not so nice. And Amma has a humorous version of that. There was a couple that were fighting all the time because the husband wanted to have his coffee in bed, and he wanted it, the mug should be full to the top. But that's so hard to do because the bedroom was upstairs. So she had to climb the stairs with this full mug, and it would always spill. And then she was afraid, and she would burn her hands like that. So she never got it to the top. And then they would fight about that, and he was so upset. He was like, "Why didn't you just make yourself?" But he was stubborn. So suddenly, the arguments stopped, and the wife started bringing a full mug up the staircase and into the bedroom, and he was so amazed. He was wondering, how could she possibly do it? I'm so proud of her, because she accomplished it finally. A few days went by, and his curiosity got the best of him. He said, honey, how did you get that? How did you get it up the staircase with that much coffee in it? And she said, well, I had an idea. Like, when I was about to climb the first stair, I took a big sip from the mug, and when I got to the top, I spat it back in the mug. Don't try that one at home. So, such thoughtless actions are called tamasic actions. Without considering the consequences, they jump from the frying pan into the fire. Okay, that's only 1 out of 5. We better get going, I guess. Loss means the expenditure to achieve the action in question. Amma also spends a lot of money, but for the benefit of society. However many millions she spent on the hospital in Faridabad, just think how many lives will be saved and changed. Then there'll be many other people who are inspired by Amma's compassion, which leads them to re-evaluate their priorities in life. And how can you put a price tag on saving lives, changing and inspiring people? In a small way, when we read Amma's books or study a traditional scripture, not only do we benefit from the wisdom, but others benefit from us too, once we start practicing the teachings. The third point was harm. So in the course of seeking our desires, we might hurt others without knowing it, inadvertently. So there should be no harm to anyone else when we pursue our own desires. It should not be at the cost of others' welfare. And the fourth point, this is just what Krishna is saying, I'm just elaborating on it. Loss of power refers to our personal resources. So the time and our physical and mental energy. I remember Devidas is here in the room with me, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but like he said in his satsang, he had a fantasy of living in the forest of Kauai, surviving on fruits and whatever else is available there. But after a few weeks, however, he realized that it was too difficult. At least he lasted a few weeks. I don't think most people would even last a day. But he realized that it was too difficult. So we first have to understand our own physical, mental, and emotional capacity. All of these are indicators of tamasic action. Overlooking the consequences, losses of various kinds, harm to oneself and others, and overtaxing our personal resources. So I guess it was actually 4, not 5. We should consider these words of Krishna as very practical advice coming from Amma. So here's an example, because Amma is the master of practical action. When we propose an idea to Amma, she often responds with counter questions like, what about your relatives and neighbors? What would they say about it? How much is it going to cost? I mean, is it good only for you, or is it good for everybody? Is it good for nature? Do you have the inner strength to do it? And one actual episode took place. Once a devotee wanted to build a spiritual community, but Amma knows better than anybody what that entails. And while talking about the devotee's idea, Amma asked innocent questions and thereby adroitly guided them to reach the right choice. It turned out that they hardly had enough money to buy the land and haven't given enough thought to the construction, not to mention all the maintenance needed before and after the construction. Even more difficult is solving all the personal problems that begin once the facilities are ready. So, in the end, Amma saved them from so much suffering, not by a command, but by leading their thought process to consider factors they were unaware of. And this is how she helps all of us in all situations. There are so many things in life that we don't know about because we don't have that wisdom. But Amma is a fountain, an ocean of wisdom. And that is why she guides us gently so that we feel it was like a cooperation between her and us, and we're not just being scolded and told what to do. And in that way she empowers us as well. Because if you're just an automaton doing, I'll do this, Amma said that, I have to do that. She wants us to understand the logic behind her recommendations. So that is the way a true guru teaches his or her disciples or devotees. They will help you reach the right answer so that you understand why. And even now, these little kids, Bodham, he must be like 4 at most. And she's telling him, how do you do this? And he says, you have to have bhakti. What happens if you get bhakti? Then this happens. And she has this whole like series of questions and answers with a 3 or 4-year-old kid. And he's memorizing it, but he's still understanding in a logical way. So as far as a 3-year-old can be logical, he's figured it out, which is beautiful to watch. Jnaneshwar has an introduction to the next verse, which I will share with you. I have given to you a full and reasoned explanation of the threefold actions which come from the threefold gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Now, harboring the false pride that he is the real doer while performing actions, the Jivatma is also differentiated into 3 distinct types. Just as one and the same person appears fourfold on account of the 4 different stages of life, like brahmacharya, and if you get married, grihasthashram, and so on, and so vanaprastha and sannyasa. So these 4 different stages of life apply to the same individual. So they seem like 4 different people. But in that same way, the doer also becomes threefold according to the 3 types of action. Therefore, I shall now talk about the sattvic doer, the first of the 3 kinds, and hear about it attentively. And that's going to be next week. For now, I will answer one question that I left from last week, and we can conclude a little earlier than normal. The question is, is the personality associated with the Atman or Prakriti? So Atman, we all know, is pure consciousness. It is the Supreme Brahman looked at from our position. And when you look at it from the universal standpoint, it's Brahman or Paramatman. And so her question, this person I know is a woman, so is the personality associated with the Atman or Prakriti? Prakriti is everything in this universe that is perceptible. Consciousness cannot be perceived, not with any eyes or our ears and our nose like that. But we know it's there, it exists. So everything else is Prakriti. What you're looking at over the internet is Prakriti. Your body is Prakriti, your emotions are Prakriti, and all these things. So the question is, how can it be the Atman if the Atman is same in everyone? See, the personality, we're talking about personality. How can the personality be the Atman if the Atman is the same in everyone? How can it be Prakriti when Prakriti is inert? It's a very good question. So I'm going to try to answer this question to the best of my, the best I can. First of all, the Atman has no attributes at all. This is something that is repeated in all the scriptures. It has no color, no personality, no likes and dislikes, and it's not a human being, it's not an animal, it's not a worm or something like that. It is pure consciousness. So with no attributes, whereas Prakriti, by definition, is made up of all the attributes. So if we want any attribute, big, small, tall, fish, human, lion, and angry, that's also a quality, right? Angry, sad, happy, all these things that change are attributes. Mental attributes, intellectual attributes, bodily attributes, energy attributes. I feel tired, I feel energetic. All these things are just attributes, and they are enlightened, or they are illuminated by the consciousness. That's what it is. So, but Prakriti is not sentient by itself. Just like you pick up a pen, it doesn't have a life. It doesn't have a consciousness. Amma says everything has some kind of existence, so we have to pay attention, we have to pay heed to them and honor them, but it's not an animal, it's not like a live thing. A desk doesn't have a soul necessarily. So all those, the consciousness is Atma, and everything else is Prakriti. Now, sentience belongs to the Atman, and how does that consciousness accumulate or acquire attributes? That's the question I think this person is saying. So personality is a combination of Prakriti and Atma. Because without the Atma, the body is going to be mud, basically, in a short time. And so it has to be there. It's present, consciousness. And the attributes of a personality are also somewhere in that mix. So we would say it is wrong perception. We covered this a few classes before, how Jnaneshwar explains how the Atman, or the consciousness itself, is deluded into thinking it is the body, deluded into thinking that it has these feelings and personality and so on. So the way that happens is hard for us to understand because we're in that delusion. But so we have to use other examples, and the common ones are like looking at the sky through a window. So let's say you're inside the room or the house of this body, and you're looking through the window of your sense organs. What you can see is limited, because these 5 senses all have their own limitations. We can't hear what a dog hears. We can't hear what a lot of animals hear. We can't smell like a dog smells. So we have very weak organs, actually. So in that way, if you have a little similar, like a limited size, very small window, how much of the sky can you see? How much space can you experience? Not much. But so long as we identify with this house that we're in, and so long as we're looking through these sense organs, we can only perceive so much. And we cannot understand the concept of infinity in reality. So everything about us is based on the premise that we are finite. And once we feel that we're finite and incomplete, all the other personality traits come. Another example is like, let's say we're in a pond that is fed by the water table. Well, we're sitting in our pond, and there's a guy over there sitting in his pond, another person sitting over there, and we're saying that my pond is better, oh, your pond is better, and we think that there's a difference, but actually the water is coming from the same water table, the reservoir, deep down. So like that, the Atma is like that water table, or it's the reservoir of water, and here it's the reservoir of consciousness, that everybody doesn't share. We are that. Because if you go to a water molecule in the reservoir, you say, are you part of this reservoir? He'll say, what reservoir? It's all water, and I'm water. So there's no difference between this molecule and the whole reservoir. It's the same thing. So because we don't understand that, we think that the personality has to be either Prakriti or Atma. In the body, it feels like it is part of us, but it actually belongs to the subtle body, and we're identified with that subtle body. So this consciousness is deluded into thinking that it is my attributes. I hope that helps. It is not you, but until you realize that you are the Atman, it's going to feel like it is you. Or we can try our best to keep a distance from that subtle body. Don't believe what the mind says. Don't identify with what the mind says, and you double check the intellect's choices and judgments, they can also be wrong. So as long as you look at the subtle body independently, objectively, and try not to identify with it all the time, that's better than saying that I'm scared, I'm happy, I'm angry. We can say the mind is angry, the mind is upset, and the mind is being, lazy, like that. Just a little bit of objectivity helps us get closer to the reality of the Atman rather than identifying with all our so-called personality. So light has no attributes, but it illuminates all things, whether they're active or inert. And due to our ignorance, we confuse the unlimited and unchanging to be limited and changing. And one last thing about Prakriti, just to make it very clear for this person and everybody else perhaps. Prakriti is manifest during the creation with infinite qualities. Then Prakriti is unmanifest during the pralaya, which is the dissolution of the universe, which only lasts for a mere 315 trillion years, give or take a few trillion years. So during the pralaya, all the qualities are dissolved along with Prakriti. So there's no physical universe. All there is Sat. There's Brahman. It's Paramatman. It doesn't need this universe to survive. It is existence itself. Why should he depend on anybody else, anything else? Prakriti is constantly changing while consciousness never changes, remaining eternally the same. So our personality is definitely not staying the same the whole time. So it's just a bad marriage of consciousness and Prakriti. So once we transcend all these things that we think are us, we'll get a better idea. And that means we have to stay on the path and stay with Amma for a long time. We've been there many times with her before, and now we have to just stay the path until we get there. And there's no point in getting off the train halfway to the destination. It's going to happen, but we cannot force it. So we have to be patient and follow Amma's example. All right. We will conclude with this, and we will chant the first two closing prayers, and those who have time to join us can meditate with us for a little while after that. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Let us meditate together for some time. Close your eyes. Check your posture. Try to keep your spine and neck relatively straight. And take a few long, deep breaths. With each deep, long breath, you feel the body and mind relaxing further and further. Feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel that you are in her embrace, even here. You can feel the warmth of her hug, as if you were hugging her heart and feeling that love. Now focus your attention to the flow of your breathing process. Witness the breathing process like you were sitting on the banks of a peaceful creek. The water gently moving. Simply watch it and feel the peace. Now let us visualize, since the mind is relatively calm, try to visualize a time when you found it difficult, when you were doing something. It was hard to keep your mental balance, emotions, and a good attitude. Visualize that same episode, that same situation, if you had been in sattvic action. Sattvic action is that sattvic action is that which is free from attachment to the act itself and to the fruits of that action. At the time we might have had some vested interests, some attachment, some personal feelings about it. Now visualize that same situation without those in your mind. How that would go. Alternatively, we can think of an action that we must perform in the near future. Perhaps one that gives us worry, fear, or uncertainty. You may have something to say about it. And just imagine that internally you don't have any attachment to the outcome personally. For others, we can pray. But for ourselves, we should just allow just have a positive attitude and not be attached to the act nor the fruits of it. Going in with a peaceful mind and with acceptance. Now let us pray to Amma that she helps us to be a sattvic person. We want sattvic knowledge, we want sattvic action, and we want to be a sattvic doer. Only she can help us attain that. Let us pray to her internally. Now let us close with the final prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes if you wish. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And I believe we have a slide about Swamiji's retreat at the end of the month. So please, everyone, join, and I will see you there. Om Namah Shivaya.